Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
I'm Jakob Lykkegaard. I'm originally from Denmark, but now based in Bangkok and have been there for the last 6-7 years. And today I'm going to talk about how data transforms teams and games at Playlab, but I'm going to start out by actually showing you a little bit about who Playlab is. Great. All right, a little bit more about who we are. So Playlab, we were founded around 3 years ago in Bangkok, did around a little bit over $11 million last year in gross revenue. Have over 25 million downloads with around 100 people, and these people are based in both Bangkok and Manila, with around 65 in Bangkok and around 40 in Manila. And the Manila studio was actually a studio we acquired last year. That was a Nino game. So that's been the oldest game studio in Manila. They've been around for 12 years on those pines. A little bit about the games we do and the ones we have more officially published by now. We have Juice Cubes that are by far the biggest one. That was also distributed together with Rovio to all the Angry Birds users. Then we have Jungle Cubes, Farm Cubes, Dual Cubes, Dragon Cubes, and Bubble Cubes in the Cubes universe genre, which are all in the match 3 way, but with different types of twists on how we actually do the games, how we monetize them, how we use the boosters and all these parts, trying to break up some of the, get away from the Saga model into new ways of doing things and balancing it. The last game we have down here, a Ranch Run, which is more of a co-development deal. So that's deals we go in where we find great games and great teams that needs the other resources that we actually have to help them out with. So today I'm going to talk about how we use data to pick games that we work on, what markets we are going to go into, and also how we help our teams with these decisions and with data on it. So first I'm going to talk about how we pick games. Basically, there's a lot of different genres that I see split out based on organic growth if you look at today's market, especially with the games we see here at Casual Connect and those casual parts of it. But if I break it up into organic growth, and also on the other side you have the RPU or the LTV, I see it as basically a line of having the casual games spread out, where on the far left side, you see the super casual games, the games that have a very high growth of organic users, are very, very viral, meaning the Flappy Bird games, the Catch App games, Subway Surfers, and those parts. Then if you go a little bit further down, we have the match 3 games that are a little bit less organic growth, but still very much based around having Facebook plugins, having it around the social media networks, trying to get your friends in to play it and grow it that way. They don't get as many organics as the Flappy Bird games do, but they get more than if we go to the next step that are more in on the mid-core type of games. If we check out all Supercell games like Clash of Clans, or in our case we have Ranch Run, it's a little bit more mid-core on those sides, less organic growth. You don't base them around on Facebook games. For example, you will never get spammed by your friends on Facebook for playing Clash of Clans. They do, however, still have some groups within the games, some leagues that they use to grow it. On the very far down on the slide, we see the casino slots games that basically have almost no organic growth in it. The users that are getting into those games are purely based on advertising cost of acquiring users in other games and other places. So when you acquire one user in one of these games, it's very few that actually follows with him. If we then, on the other side, plug in the RPU, or average revenue per user, on the other side, we will see that the Flappy Bird organic type of the very super casual games, they have very little average revenue per user. They make almost no money per user that they get in. If we move over to the match 3 genre, you'll make a little bit more per user. And that's also the point where you can actually start doing user acquisition on. So from the The match 3, the mid-core, the slots games, this is the part where you can do user acquisition on. On the other side, where you have the more super casual games, you can't do any user acquisition. You are fully dependent on how you get your featuring in. You're fully depending on how the people actually accept the games in the market, because you can't use any marketing money on those parts. The interesting part of this slide is also that you can actually cross-promote from down the line, from left to right. So these super casual games are really good for traffic-driven generation. And further down, you get less traffic out of them, but you can still cross-promote the way through on those parts. So at Playlab, we mainly focus on the last 3 genres of games. We're moving a little bit into slots now, but before only been doing more mid-core and more match 3. And that is purely based on, it's less depending on luck and featuring on it, and more depending on user acquisition. So the lifespan we had on the games are a lot longer of how we can keep it in the market, because we can keep acquiring users into the market. We don't need it to have a full-on featuring all the time. So the lifespan is longer. It's more based on developer skills to get someone to do an in-app purchase in your game than it is for the super casual to get them to download it. On the market side, we have 2 different markets where we're making money. The way we pick markets are basically where do we make money today, and where can we see we can make money tomorrow. The markets we're making money in today are still very much on the Western markets, the tier 1 countries like US, Australia, England for that matter. And the secondary markets that we are going into are more based on growth. So if we look at our CPI cost year on year, for example, a country where I'm based in, like Thailand, compared to our US cost, US went up with around 50% last year of our cost, which is getting very high and very expensive here. But if we, on the other hand, look at Thailand, where we started very low in the beginning of the years, that has doubled several times over the years. So if we look at this growth alone, if I spend $100,000 in US, I can probably get 50,000 users. If I do the same in Thailand, I will get 250,000 users. If these CPIs actually keep growing, not even at this rate, but keep growing that way, ultimately the users you have acquired in Thailand will be a lot more worth than the users you have acquired in US, based on the growth and based on the other parts of the user acquisition for. So we never really focused on the countries around us in Southeast Asia, because we always had a very US Western focus on our games. But we simply keep getting asked the question about, can you please help us in Southeast Asia? Hey, we want to put your game there. How do we do those parts? And for a very long time, we've been more like, hey, we are just based here. We don't know anything about the market. It's too small for us. We don't concentrate on it. But when you get asked that question several times, you start to look at the markets and actually follow the growth rates of the markets and can see where can we actually make money, where can we make money tomorrow when US get too competitive, and the same with Europe and the other parts. And that's when we started to look at Southeast Asia. So if we take this index growth over Southeast Asia, on the upwards we have revenue, and on the other side we have downloads. We can see that there are 2 outliers in it. One is Malaysia and the other one is Thailand. So for entire Southeast Asia, for the 650 million people you have there, overall the growth in revenue was around 50%. But if you take Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, you actually had more than 100% growth in the market. So we have a market where it actually doubled in revenue entire last year for the entire market, and it will double again next year in revenue. So the growth rates here are really high. Some of the reasons for this are, of course, that people, they start spending more money. You get a lot better smartphone penetration in the market, but you also start to have advertisers that are growing out of US and Japan and looking for new markets that they can push into. And you can see this new focus on the market. One thing is, of course, higher CPI prices, but also better content for the market, actually pushing through doing user acquisition, getting people addicted to play the games there, and get them in. I would say that this chart is from App Annie, so I think the Vietnam part of this slide is maybe not fully correct, because in Vietnam you have a lot of local payment providers that are spending their money outside the App Store, and App Annie would not be able to track those parts. So yeah, these are also some of the reasons why we shifted our focus a lot more to Southeast Asia. It's still a long-term play for us, but switched the focus to look at where we have the growth, and also one of the reasons why we acquired Anino Games in Philippines and why we did the co-development deal with Infinity Levels, making Rans Run. So the approach we changed to was still on the short term. We are still finding and creating the best possible games we can in Southeast Asia. That is games we make in-house, but also games we find from other great publishers around the area. For the longer term part, we can see that we can also start publishing into Southeast Asia, because we have grown to be one of the biggest, maybe the biggest casual developer in the region right now. And by investing right now, we can, with our long-term play, actually own the market once it fully monetizes in some years, because to only focus right now in Southeast Asia, it's still too small market. You need to hit the top 10 games for you to actually make your money back, which is not good enough. But with a market rate that is doubling almost every year, you can now go in and actually become one of the games that they play, keep building your user base, because the prices and the growth rates are only going up on those markets also. So how we help the teams. First of all, it's important to know that our game teams are very independent, so it's important for us to give them the right tools to fix the problems and to give them the right data to do it as well. So for game teams internally, we have a producer in every title that have their small teams and take very data-driven decisions. Basically, they call the shots. Everything I tell them, they don't have to implement, but they call the shots. They have the small teams. They move forward. They only focus on the games, so we can have less bureaucracy, more creativity to keep the opinions in, and to also dig deeper down in the data. Because if you take top-driven decisions, it's really difficult to do that on 6 titles if you have to dig into the data and actually optimize on different points. So it works really great for the freemium models to have someone that is living and breathing this single game and taking the decisions in of how we should grow it. So the very important tools, the things you cannot fuck up, are basically also around the analytics, QA, marketing, backend servers, social platforms, and payments. We've chosen to centralize that and to make sure that the code in those tools are the best possible there is, and that we can always do cutting-edge analytics and QA, and basically just make the game teams focus on the games and the data in it, but by giving them centralized tools around it. So one of those tools on the analytics part, and why we also centralized it, is that if you centralize analytics, you can keep the game teams a lot smaller, because once you get up to a certain amount of volume and need to look at specific events and specific points in your games, then you start to need to have a lot of people on the teams that build out the dashboards, that integrate the solutions. And by centralizing it, we can keep the game teams small, but giving them the right data. We can also validate purchases. So still a very big problem is actually people cheating in games or events getting fired in the wrong way. And if we have a game designer or producer that are balancing the game for monetization, if he has the wrong events within the games that are not validated with Google and Apple servers, he can take the wrong decision based on where people cheat instead of based on where people spend. And it's actually a longer process to validate these data points and make sure that you only give correct data to the people that are looking at it and sort out on the different points. We can also, by centralizing the data points, actually have cross-comparison between the games. So a lot of the, for example, match 3 games we have, you can get one game team to look into a specific thing in the game and see, are we actually performing good or bad at this point? If you only have one data set, you don't really know if are these 14% good or bad. But when you have 6 different games and have the centralized analytics, you can go to other games, our other games, and look at the same exact point to see if these numbers are better or worse than those points. It also helps us to have a combined backend, so we only need to have one backend team that can stay out of the game teams that are making sure that the servers are scalable and can grow as they are. And of course, it allows to do a lot more advanced user acquisition, meaning that we can track the user throughout the entire game process, and we can also keep tracking that users across the other games when we actually want to cross-promote some of the content. Other tools we have chosen to centralize are, for example, our internal virtual player that we can use to balance the levels before we release. So our internal virtual player will actually play the levels through thousands of times as a good player and a low player. That gives the team a lot better data to actually act on these decisions instead of just releasing levels that you think are balanced to the market and then let your highest paying users, because as a game process, if you're releasing new content, your highest paying users will always be on the last levels. And if you then release unbalanced levels to them, they will basically get to the levels that are either too easy or too hard. So it's very important that anytime you release new content, that is always as balanced as possible. This is also another point that we internally had a really good crowd-tested platform where we could send it out to users or more QA testers that could play through the levels, figure out where we had the drop-off, figure out where we could actually optimize on the different tools. And we have recently chosen to actually also open this crowd platform to the public. We call it testship.co, where people, just like other game companies, can actually now go in on our platform, submit their builds, and send it out to all our crowd testers, a few hundred, that we are growing now to a few thousand. Send it out to them, and only pay per bug that you find in the game or pay per level that they play through, meaning that it's a very low entry cost and you only have to pay for either the levels they play or the bugs that you validate are correct in the build. So this is also another side of the business we are going into, because we can see our internal tools. We can either sell them to other companies as well, or there's also some of our data analytics tools that we have chosen to open source to simply give back to the community and make sure that they can improve on those points. That is pretty much sums up some parts of how we use the data and how we use it to make decisions on it. Feel free to reach out to me or grab me for coffee. I'll be here for the rest of the day. Otherwise, enjoy your day, and thank you.